Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. I'm here with my friend Angel Prime. I've known each other for a long time. I've both been in the trenches in one way or another with political stuff, and we're here to talk about agitation propaganda, or more broadly, the role of political stunts and political theater in third-party organizing, and some of our experiences and the wish list for what we want to be doing. How are you doing, Angel?
I'm doing well. It's been a long week and it's only Wednesday. Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for doing this. How's the weather in the Midwest right now?
It's been really hot this summer and it's been really humid, which is I think it's very indicative of where things are going. Normally Chicago winters, I mean it varies. Sometimes it is this humid, but it's not uncommon to have 70-degree weather, 60-degree weather, to need like a light hoodie or jacket. And this is the first summer that I'm actually kind of like, I prefer I prefer having a cooler summer than having like a hot summer. And I can't really stand temperatures above 70 degrees right now. It's just not, I've become, I guess, Midwestern in my temperature preferences.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't like it here.
Cool. What's that? No, I wouldn't.
You would not like it here. It's a hot summer.
For a lot of reasons, I wouldn't like it there. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's a couple of things about do with that. I miss going to Los Angeles again this week. There's a longevity conference, and I'm taking a road trip with a few members of my party, and we're making a little appearance. I'm actually going to be recording some stuff there about. It's a conference around a book release by the chair of the California Transhumanist Party, a friend of mine who's been interviewed on the podcast. But I haven't been in LA in a little while. I'm excited to. I miss it. I got to kind of have some roots here in Arizona now, but there's definitely a lot of things where a city like Chicago or Los Angeles has a lot that Phoenix doesn't.
Yeah, it's a weird. I've been to Phoenix and I've been through parts of Arizona. It's been years. That's not true. I was there just back in 2016 or 17. Maybe it was 2016. On the way back from Burning Man, I drove through the Grand Canyon area, and I got to see Lake Sedona, and got a kind of a different perspective from, like, before that I'd only seen like Phoenix and Tucson, and was not very impressed. I had kind of didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth, but I was not. It was also like one of the rare times that there was like this deluge of like it just the skies just opened up and it just pissed rain for like, and it ended up flooding. So the friend of the person that I was staying with, their bike got flooded because the waters had, it just had gotten so high that their engine flooded on their bike.
Jeez.
So it was kind of a rare, like, I guess that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, we have monsoons here, and so when it does, we have a particular monsoon season, as it's called. It seems a little dumb to call it that, but it's what it's called here.
Right.
So when those few days when it is raining, boy, does it rain.
Yeah.
Speaking of deluge in Tucson and political theater, I saw a thing a few days ago. Tucson has this reputation of being sort of the lefternmost larger urban center in Arizona. It's kind of a lefty place. And so I was a little upset the other day because I saw something that was the kind of political theater that is quite disturbing. Some white nationalists distributing literature there, and the thrust of this article was basically that no place, even Tucson, is immune from this in this current climate. What do we do to combat this kind of thing, or counter program with a better kind of message?
I mean, it's really difficult. I think that we have a very small window to act in between now and 2020. I think that we really need to be gearing up our on all fronts what it is that we're trying to collectively say. I feel like we have this tendency on the left, and I'm going to use left in quotation marks because I think most people, when they're talking about the left, they're actually talking about the center. And I
agree.
Way beyond. I'm like, we should have seized the means of production. Like, what year is it? Like at the beginning of the century, But that's my opinion. I feel like there are definitely people who are more Obama, Hillary centrists, and I think that we need to be definitely moving in the direction of Sanders and Warren, but I don't know if that's going to be good enough. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
any of this is going to be good enough. And as far as the problem with white supremacy in this country is that we have the dominant paradigm refusing to acknowledge that this is the largest terrorist group in our
Mm.
country. They're continuously mobilizing
Always
and
trying to flip the
committing
script.
acts of very
Yeah.
visible acts of terror. And until we treat it as a terrorism threat, we're not going to see anything change really. People talk about gun control, and I think that that's part of it. I think it's ridiculous if you have to go through more. You have to jump through more hoops to get a car and to be able to drive it legally than to get a gun. I think that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And Illinois has one of the strictest gun laws. We have the FOID card, and I, for example, because of my medical history, because of some issues that I had, might not qualify for a FOID card, and so I might not be able to buy a firearm here in Illinois. I'm fine
Mm.
with that. Now,
Yeah.
if I go to Indiana and all I need is an Indiana driver's license. That's all I need.
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
I mean, they have gun shows where I
Yeah.
don't think you
Some
even really need
people.
that.
Yeah. No.
But
No.
it's funny. I went to a camping store, and all I wanted to do was try picking up one of the guns and just holding it for like just to get a feel for it. And one of the people there wouldn't let me do that unless I was able to give them a driver's license. Like, oh, you're out of state now. We can't let you do that.
Yeah.
Another person was like totally like it's like, hey, go nuts. Hey, like there's no ammunition in them, so they're not loaded. But still, I'm glad that there were people who at least took it that seriously, that they wouldn't let you even
Mm.
hold a gun that had no bullets in it just because. And this is in Indiana, on the Indiana side.
Mm.
But going back to the problems with white supremacists, I think that the problems with gun control are only they're not addressing the real issue, which is that we have a problem with people not realizing that we are moving our culture towards one of fascism, and racism is part of that rhetoric. The division that comes in separating uh, our country into people who are desirable and who are considered the upstanding, law-abiding, in this case Christian, probably citizen, versus the outsider and
Mm.
the undesirable. And I'm constantly on edge because I belong to so many of the marginalized communities that are being targeted. The the Latinx community, the immigrant community. My birth certificate is in Texas. I'm from the United States, um, but I look like I could be from somewhere else, and that's all that it takes for some people.
Do you
English is
do you
English.
think
Is my Go ahead.
do you think that these concerns and paranoias and I mean, do you feel that it's bleeding broadly into people like yourself, Latinx, Chicano people, that they don't feel safe, even though they should have nothing to be concerned about?
I mean, I'm witnessing people on the border being denied passport renewals. I'm witnessing people getting detained that are U.S. citizens. I think that if you're not afraid right now, then
Hmm.
you're not paying attention.
Very true. Yeah.
This is like from the playbook of what you do to get a society that's willing to look the other way when they become more and more fascist.
Hmm.
And it's ironic to me because fascism it's a militant like state run. I mean, like
Hmm.
it's militant big government, and yet we have conservatives who are thinking. I mean, it's the cognitive dissonance is ridiculous.
Yeah. And that,
Conservatives that are thinking that it's better to have this system of what I call, like Christian Sharia law. They basically
yeah,
want everything to be from the Bible, and it's like that's Sharia law. That's the same thing.
yeah,
It's using the Quran as the Constitution, except we're just using the Bible, which is
yeah,
So
yeah.
no,
And I view this kind of, yeah.
I think it's very scary where we are right now, and I don't think that people are taking it as seriously as they should. And what bothers me is that you know, it's Latinx people, and they've already said that it's going to be. They've already started taking away trans rights, and then it's going to be. They're looking at the mentally ill, and they're looking at homeless people, and
Mm.
there's overlap in those communities. There's overlap in all of those communities. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very real problem, and we're going to start to see more and more people going to detention centers. And once these detention centers are moved to black sites, basically to to the former concentration camps where the internment camps where the Japanese were held, and to like onto like former military bases, we're not going to be able to see what's happening to people once they go behind those gates.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this is a very frightening time, and people aren't thinking about it in that way.
yeah,
I'm trying to get out of the country because I don't feel safe here anymore.
yeah, yeah. I felt that way. I know one of the people that I worked with on this campaign closely is she left the country shortly after this president was selected, and it's a horror show. And the saddest part of it is all of these race to the bottom things, all of these class warfare on the part of these folks. You mentioned the Sharia law. We mentioned this other persecution of minority groups. All of this stuff. It's just so that you talked about these third way Democrats, the good corporatists.
Right.
It's just so that they don't have to reframe or even have this, the barest of reforms, the Liz Warren type of reforms. It's all a lot of misdirection, so that they can change the prevailing winds and distort all of that. And so we're literally just cutting off our nose to spite our face in by not having humane economic policies and then fomenting civil unrest to distract from the fact that the people do have the political will for those kind of reforms.
Yeah, and
It's
I want
horrible.
to stress this, that even though I consider myself far left, and even though I feel like we should be in the process of organizing every single tactic at our disposal, and I mean starting with a general strike, but also going into looking at how we can vote for harm reduction. Because no, I don't agree with voting as the most perfect system, but we found that when we participate, we get somebody like Obama. When we
Yeah,
don't, we have the last 3 years, and it's been a nightmare for anybody
yeah,
that's been paying attention. It's been a nightmare, and I mean
yeah,
it's sad because the people who voted for him, the farmers, they're realizing some of them are realizing the error of their ways. Some of them are going to vote for 45 again, and
yeah,
it's just again the cognitive dissonance is like you shot yourself in the foot once, you're going to shoot the other foot off too. Is that
yeah,
how that
yeah,
works?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping that we do get something that's a little bit more representative of what the people actually want. Um, but worst case scenario, if the DNC decides to screw the pooch again and go with somebody like
yeah,
Biden or O'Rourke, which would be awful, it's the thing is that it's sad to say anybody is better than 45. It's a fact.
yeah, yeah.
Anybody is better than 45, and at least they have some government experience. 45 can barely
Yeah, no,
run
he's
a
not. Yeah,
run a successful like
he's
wrestling franchise or whatever. I don't even know what his
yeah,
thing.
he's driven all of his business into the ground. It's just a maniac. And yeah, it's it's interesting. These last two presidents both ran as reform tickets. Obama in his first campaign was regarded as somebody who was going to be this great reformer. And I think that some of the criticism of him in that was all of that was very valid, but also he did have advisors who were specifically trying to keep him from just having his whole operation gutted by this. The GOP in the wake of his election just became this anti-healthcare terrorist organization,
Yeah,
and they were so there was so much opposition to him that he didn't have points that he could stake leftward. He did work to the death rate from uninsured being completely uninsured did drop by some tens of thousands in the course of his and it's gone up a little bit now. So we have
mm,
you said, and those are the only measures that we can be looking at. I was on an interview with a transhumanist hard leftist last night. His name's BJ Murphy, and we were debating the sort of best practices towards full automation, a kind of an idea that's particular to technocrats and tech people, but that reflects a lot of the ideas in a more in the broad spectrum of socialist notions, and
mm.
it's a thing where I don't voting is not a suicide pact. If you vote for Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren and still continue to you absolutely should still be continuing to organize in more productive ways besides the voting. If you and also we have to find in everything we do be hopefully focusing on harm reduction, on bringing those fatalities from that result from inhumane economic policies and from death care. We have to find ways to bring that down. It's not a pageant. It's speaking of political theater and the hard right and the hard left, this Antifa concern. So I mean, almost everybody I know, probably a lot of people would be kind of described as being Antifa adjacent. But the idea that there should be these street fights, there's like half of those guys are actually just like the Proud Boys putting on masks and pretending to be Antifa and riling them up. Some of them are feds doing the same thing, and then they get millions and millions of likes and shares for this dog and pony show that they created of anger at regular protesters and organizers. It's insane.
Yeah, my feeling is that if the organization is able to do the work of what a force that is not the police force that we have in this country, because the point that I keep making to people is that, if you have somebody who's a white supremacist, and then if you have people in the police force who are also white supremacists, who's going to stand up for you? I mean, like, and this is a proven fact that you have like in CPD here in Chicago, you have people that used to run with very racist groups. I mean, Daley it's not a secret. Daley was part of a very racist Irish gang when he was younger. Daley Sr., when he was younger, was part of a very racist Irish gang. I mean, the city still has a lot of the division based on ugly stereotypes, and it's those attitudes that are being carried into the police force. And so my feeling is if Antifa is doing what it says that it's doing, then it is providing a barrier in case you have both the white supremacist and the institution of like the enforcer of state violence, also doing what, looking the other way, basically, when the Proud Boys decide to go in and start attacking people, or protecting them, and I think that it's a tough, I'm not, sympathizing with the cops at all, but I think it's a difficult job because they do want to make sure that, people aren't getting hurt. But at the same time, it's like, if I had to pick one or the other, there's definitely a bias that I have. You started to say.
Oh no, I don't mean to disavow political violence. There is a line, at the beginning of this talk, you mentioned that we are at that line, and we need to be willing to do things beyond simply voting. But it's more just, Noam Chomsky has written a lot about this. That basically people wouldn't be talking about Milo Y and the Proud Boys and XYZ if it weren't for these events that they're putting together, and it just doesn't sit right with me, the way that it plays in the media, the way that these guys have this persecution complex for this event that they orchestrated, and they're turning those centrist sheeple against protest culture in general, with this ridiculous kind of displays that they're putting on. But you're right. There's good things to be doing. Let's talk about Chicago. Let's talk about some. You mentioned some kind of things that you did in the Poppers 2020 and other political events and stunts that you would organize. Can you tell us about some of those? Let's trip down memory lane.
Sure. Well, I want to give a little bit of backstory. So the Poppers character, and I'm actually fondling a little, this is a little artifact from the Poppers Trevor. This is like a newer. It's got an actual chain to keep it on there. But it's the Poppers character is it's based on the idea of of kind of like a clown, but like a weird psychotic clown that is extremely sexual, hypersexual, and probably on a lot of drugs, and a little bit dangerous, but fun generally. And I would be going to these parties. I was part of an underground scene of electronic music here in Chicago. I was going to these parties, and I get hot. I take my shirt off, and this. I'm a very hairy person. I don't look like somebody that you would come up and fondle, but like these guys, and I don't think that they were all, I don't think that they were gay. I think that they were straight guys, would come up and like, because my nipples are pierced, would try and touch my nipples. And I was not comfortable with this. And so the name Popper's the Consent Clown is from my second Burning Man. I was gifted this tail, but it's the size and shape doesn't really look like a tail to me. It looks more like a different appendage, which actually is Latin for tail. Penis is Latin for tail. And so that coupled with the kind of wolfy tail, and I also have a hat with some wolf ears. That became the Poppers, the Consent Clown persona. And I would run around. I mean, it gets hot at parties, like it's just a lot of bodies, a lot of movement. I'd be dancing, I'd be doing whatever I was doing that was heightening my experience. So I would run around in a jockstrap with my ass hanging out and like nothing but this like furry tail covering my asshole and this, in front, And so the guys would go after this instead of these, right? And so they would start, they'd start grabbing for it, and then some of them would actually grab it. They'd be like, "Wait, are you actually in there?" And I'd be like, "Well, you should have asked first, And that's kind of like where the character came from, and it just kind of evolved from there. So that was, that was my burlesque persona. Like I would do burlesque, and I would throw parties. I started throwing my own parties for rent, and just because it's fucking fun to throw a party. And I would take this character and I would just fuck with people, and it was mostly harmless, and it was mostly in without malice, and in the spirit of like good natured ribbing. But at a certain point, I would find people at the events that were doing things or saying things or being a person that didn't necessarily need to be there. And it's, the best example, the easiest example is somebody that was being very creepy or being sexually aggressive. And we would have fun at these parties. People would get naked. There, like DJs would get blowjobs. It was like it was kind of a free for all, like drug fueled orgy. So I wanted people to feel comfortable. And so they can't do that if you've got somebody that's, being a creeper, being like sexually aggressive. But there's, I also would meet people that just have a really shitty attitude and be like, you're getting bounced. And I would try to do it in a funny way, and I would try and like give them an opportunity to be like, hey, this is what you're doing, so don't do this. And if they didn't, I would, bounce them. Fast forward to, this last 2 or 3 years, I kind of had a few life events that, let's just say, they shifted my perspective. But long story short, I got this brilliant idea, that I was going to run for president and do it as Popper's the Consent Clown. And I somehow convinced my friend who's over in Spain to campaign with me. And so we actually had a website, and we were developing our platform and talking points and like trying to do the whole thing. All obviously, this was just a pipe dream, but it was it was a pipe dream. It was a publicity stunt. It was just something to give me. And for me, the most transformative part of thinking that way is I actually started to try and think up solutions to what was as if I were already acting president. Like, what would I be doing right now to try and just change everything? And that's a very empowering place to be in right now, when I feel like there's so much like despair and hopelessness, and it's like it looks really bleak. The Amazon's burning right now, and it's scary. But if you feel like you have that level of power, that you could do, like, what could we realistically be doing with present day technology, present day funding, present day, possibly changing the law so we could get more funding. It's a very empowering feeling. And I would always say this when I would talk about, like, when I would tell people that I was planning on running for president, I have no intention of ever having that level of responsibility ever in my life. Like, I would never want their job. It is one of the most stressful jobs. It is probably, if not the most stressful job in the world, it is one of the most stressful jobs in the world. And I don't want to have that responsibility. I never want to even be middle management again. Like, that's too much responsibility for me. But it is, I think that somebody who's qualified, who has the, I don't want to say integrity of character, but somebody who has the, who's at least has a little bit of integrity of character, should be in that position, because we can't have a puppet, and we can't have what we've had for the past 3 years. As far as the that was kind of a leaping off point for this whole, as you mentioned, this idea of kind of agitprop, mostly digital theater, creating the content for YouTube that was basically playing with the idea of, making fun of the fact that it's like this kind of pro wrestler Dragon Ball Z like fight, battle to win all, like Democrat versus Republican, and it's like this. You've got these. It's almost like a sports contest, right? It's almost like a football
Yeah, it
game,
is.
or it's like you have these mortal enemies, and you have to root for one side, and it's like, well, it's
Right.
lacking in all nuance and complexity, and it's like,
Yeah.
so it's like let's go with it. And I had this whole script imagined of having these crosses, right, and like having these, having one side that was like, represent me. I was going to be representing the, possibly satanic power, and it's like this is the corruption of like Christianity, and then you had this other like more humble, like, and of course he was white, preacher, he or she was white, and humble preacher that's like the actual Christianity. And at the end of the whole like build up, like this was kind of going to be the viral marketing. At the end of the whole build up, it was like, it's the bet was going to be, it's like, I had this cross of truth, and if you can touch this cross of truth without bursting into flames, then maybe you are what you say you are. And I would touch it and be like, hey, I'm running for president. It never ended. It didn't pan out. Life happened, and I got kind of distracted. But I thought that was a great leaping off point. Just kind of like trying to float that around to all the like religious conservative circles. And I mean, if you look at the poorly made content that
Yeah.
passes for like, it's so
Or,
bad. The way that it's, I
yeah.
mean, just aesthetically, it's so poorly constructed. But the content is just drivel. It's like it has no,
Yeah.
it's not even based on the Bible. Like, and this is, you challenge any Christian, and it's like, hey, I got Google, and I bet I can find in the Bible before you can something that proves my point. And I almost guarantee you can do that. You can take that bet with almost any Christian, because Christians
Yeah.
do not know the Bible,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It's
it's
like the Betty Bowers or Christians from Michelle Bachmann satire. They can't even tell the difference in that. There's
no, they can't.
people mentally handicapped almost.
Well, that's unfair to people who have mental
Yeah. Yeah.
disabilities. I would say that it's willful ignorance, and it's coming from a place of entitlement and uh, tribalism, and also a refusal to practice basic human empathy, for somebody who's going through a different experience. And to me, the greatest insult is I'm wearing this. By the way, I'm wearing this semi-ironically. It was like $3 from a 3 for 3. You get three little tiny crosses with like little rhinestones on them. But because my name is Angel, it's like a nice little, you know uh, what's like mnemonic device. Like you can see the cross and be like, yeah, Angel, yeah, yeah. But one of my more like, gothy, like, satanic looking friends was like, why don't you have it upside down? And I'm like, well, because I find like that there's nothing more satanic and evil than the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, so I feel like I can say that. But what's going on right now in all denominations, but especially in the Catholic Church, it's just like, obviously they don't really care about people. They care about self-preservation. And to me, that's the most heinous evil, is to say that you're one thing, to say that you're good and godly, and to be so almost like megalomaniacal, and so self-absorbed, and so interested only in preserving the institution of the church, and the reputation of the church, instead of taking care of the people who were abused by
Yeah.
by your clergy. It's just
Mhm.
it's insanely insulting and embarrassing. To me, it's what's happening across denominations is that they have forgotten that most of the teachings of the Bible, the words of Jesus, the words of Christ, are about helping people, and it's
Mhm.
about helping the poor. And it's about, I mean, there are 22 verses in the entirety of the Bible that talk about helping, specifically helping immigrants. And for them to be able to turn a blind eye to that is indicative of where their priorities are in being Christians. It's not about actually following Christ. It's about following an idea of Christ that's convenient to you and your
Mm. Yeah. I'm
capital.
convinced. Yeah, I'm convinced that religious literalists are all latent theocrats. That if you get a group of them together, they're going to descend into this. But there's also just this problem of religious literalism, which is you can just use it to justify any horrific thing, or just so your whatever your socially conservative worldview happens to be. You can just shoehorn it in there. by your interpretation of what you regard as a literalist view of something, and it's just completely made up. It's how I feel about people's reading of the Constitution sometimes. Like a strict constructionist of the Constitution is just in many cases just using that as a stratagem for naysaying some kind of actual good implementations, because they don't have other counter arguments against it. So they're just using pointing to the magic book. The magic book says this. It's absurd.
It's and within that book, there's so many contradictions. It was written. The different books of the book were written with different audiences in mind. There was a gap after the death of Christ for like 50 years or something, 50, 60 years in some cases. And it's like, I mean, it is written by human people that were fallible. And I would say that of all religious texts, but most specifically and particularly this one, it's not cohesive, and it has a lot of conflicting information in it. And I think that, at best, it's good to use it as a reference to see where we were, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily what we need to guide us to where we need to be. And that's, I think, talking about, transhumanist ideas, but also just like, I don't know if you're part of any any solar punk groups, but I think that there's kind of some overlap. It's having a more optimistic vision of humanity, a more optimistic vision of the future, and trying to actually salvage a future instead of just assuming that we're going to be doomed. And in order to do that, we really need to start looking at new systems or finding a way to cohabitate with the existing systems. And as much as I dislike the idea of having organized religion in my future, I have to accept the fact that there will probably always be some form of organized, institutionalized religion, and it'll probably always have, exemptions that allow it to, like all the tax breaks and all the ridiculous. I mean,
Well, the U.S. is
Go ahead.
the U.S. is an outlier in the developed world in this regard. You can say of Christians in the rest of the developed world that they're largely post-Christian. They're not religious literalists, or they're marginally religious literalists. They're people in more like Jews in the United States, who are just kind of honoring their traditions and being nice to their families, and not there's obviously a clear line in those countries between church and state. There's a political will to have sensible policies. This is not a launching pad for insane death care policies and stuff. So the U.S. is really an outlier in that regard, and that's not something from time immemorial. That we saw moves away from this and moves towards it in the 20s, the 50s, 80s, and today. It's just like the gun control thing that came up. We didn't. Those assault rifles were legal for some years, and deaths fell. And in 2005, Republicans got rid of that assault weapons ban, and those deaths rose again. But there are policy things that we can do to counter these concerns, and they're not that hard to do. We just have to be very clear as a population that these are the things that we need to happen, and work on those institutions to make that happen.
Yeah, and I want to point out a couple of things about what you're talking about, Christian secularists in different countries. It really depends on the country. And you also have to look at the historical text. When you have something like the French Revolution completely change the nation's approach to religion, and basically, it ushered in an age of reasoning, and it was really a push away from a more traditional and supernatural view of the world, and looking more towards a scientific view. I mean, that happened in France's history, and even though there's still a church, there's still Christianity in France, and I think that there are still people who practice it. It went through a period of as a country that the country itself was moving away from those things, and maybe gradually came back to them. Now, if you go to a country like Mexico, you might have a very clear and precise division between the church and state, but Catholicism and Christianity, it's shifting. I mean, I think that there are Protestant religions that have started to become more of the population. But Catholicism has been part of Mexico and Spain's history since pretty much since the inception. And so it's hard to extricate the spirit, the soul of those countries from these institutions. And it's I mean, part of it is because depending on the Christianity, but specifically Catholicism has all of these images. It's a very visual, a very sensual sensory experience when you walk into a church or a cathedral and you see. I mean, there's a reason that they invest so much money on maintaining their buildings and their iconography and their everything that has to do with the visual and sensory experience that is the faith. It's because that's part of the way that they keep people engaged in the conceptual designs of the faith. And I mean, you have countries like our time in Korea and later when I was living in China and in Japan, you have countries that their conception of religion is completely different. Their conception of spirituality. We have no frame of reference in this country because we come from an Abrahamic dominant like paradigm of how you interact with the divine, right? And in those countries, it's a completely different paradigm. And I mean, you have the first mega churches built in Korea, but I think that says more about Korean capitalism and Korean wanting to go as far with an idea as you possibly can, than about anything that was necessarily a spiritual need for Koreans. Because I think that there's similarly to as in Japan, there's kind of a cultural fabric that is not quite a religion, but it's also not like a spirituality. It's kind of like this weird gray area that kind of just permeates the entire culture. And we don't really have that. We don't have any kind of analog because
it's an interesting
good.
It's an interesting scenario, Korea specifically, and religious and social conservatism there, because there's a lot of parallels in South Korea. I should say that yes, for the sake of our viewers, Angel and I were colleagues and neighbors for a period of time some years ago. We both lived in the same city in South Korea, in that time and in the years since, and in other ways, learned a lot about Korean culture. And there's something like 35% of Korean people would be described as Christian conservatives, and or a significant number are Christians. And there's also tending to be a center-right government there. And but also for life extent, but also it's thought of by people in the transhumanist community as one of the top places where some life extensionist community could take hold. So it's interesting to be kind of probing those differences cross culturally, and certainly it bears repeating what you said, that we have a very specific view of church state problems in the U.S. and of the role of religion, and not every country has that experience, even in the places like Korea, which do bear some ostensible similarities. I wish you could do this panel. It's on Friday. I'm doing a religious transhumanist panel about religious syncretism, and it's on the Steel Archer show. This a show that we go on a lot, this Australian alternative media show. They're taking an interest in the transhumanist party, and
either love it or I would hate it, or somewhere in between. I don't know.
Well, all of these guys
depends on who's on.
Yeah. All of these guys who are on this panel, they are pretty well secularists, and certainly people who are open to life extension and open to techno-progressive concepts. They're not usually the kinds of people who are going to be engaging too heavily in a lot of serious magical thinking or serious religious literalist thinking. So I have the founder of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, which is very active. They have a very a robust intellectual discussion around life extension and AI concepts. The founder of the Christian Transhumanist Association, a Judaic transhumanist, a Buddhist monk who is also doing that from a. He's also very much a tech guy and into into life extension. So I'm excited to see where that will go. But yeah, I think people should check that out, and maybe we can do some kind of follow up to that because you seem to have you definitely have a lot of insights into the world of transhumanism. Look, can we talk a little bit more about platforms? So you mentioned that Poppers was conceived a little bit before the Me Too era, but very much about sex positivity and about having reasonable interactions with people. You mentioned, people who go to drag shows have this experience too, where you'll have straight guys just kind of acting out and throwing their ideas of good behavior to the wind, and pinching the performers and stuff. So aside from the sex positivity and that messaging, what are some other things that you want to be advocating for as in the course of this candidacy?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our campaign was basically to just fix everything that was, that we fucked up. And it was a very real, approach to how are we going to do this. And it's the main focus, I would say, if somebody said like, okay, elevator speech, what is your platform? It's like the environment has to be our priority. And that I don't think that means we're going to ignore everything else. In fact, I'm going to see where the overlap is for the problem solving. I mean, I always think to what was done with the NCCC during a period of recession to try and get people back to work. And we're slowly approaching that recession time, and we should be thinking about programs like this because we might see entire sectors of the economy start to slow down and people getting laid off in droves, and it's gonna be a bad time. And unsurprisingly, 45 in the administration, they made their money, so they don't give a fuck about the American public.
Yeah, it's a kleptocratic enterprise.
I mean, for me personally, like Poppers has always been, it's not necessarily a extension of my personality. It's more like, it's me, but it's a heightened and less inhibited version of who I am. I actually use the page that's on Facebook for a lot of my overtly satirical, but also I think aggressive, rigorous, I guess, the posts that are extremely critical of the aspects of our culture that I feel like are directly to blame for how we got to this point, not as a right-wing 45 supporting Christian, but as a sort of apathetic, disenfranchised centrist, or
that is the main
right. Well, I mean, I put blame on their shoulders as much as I do on the right. Go ahead.
You kind of alluded to the mandates in the Green New Deal and those climate crisis mandates in that. And there's a couple of versions of the Green New Deal, we should say, but the one that was put forth by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez earlier some months ago. This, and it's something that people often overlook in talking about that, is there's an awful lot of language towards programs for more humane economic policies there, and there's language for basic income in that proposal, for example. My Futurist New Deal, the Ben Zion 2020 campaign is called the Futurist New Deal, and it also it does have climate crisis language. We have an entire chapter in the Futurist New Deal for America, a long form pamphlet on that. Banning crude, we have to ban crude oil exports, fossil fuel subsidies, subsidize green energy. But it is largely a reform ticket of another kind for this basic income and for e-governance, and particularly i-voting, blockchain voting, being allowed for in every state, being implemented in every state, and a number of things of this kind. But those humane economic policies do have to be at the center of what we do. And insofar as we see the duopoly, the two-party shit show failing us, it is because of that apathy and not having that political will to strengthen the middle class, and in fact allowing bad actors like the Koch network, these people who call themselves right libertarians, and people like them, thousands and thousands and thousands of trusted Beltway insiders who were, they wear nice suits, but they're still Christ of fascists, they're still John Birch and Proud Boy adjacent, and we're letting those people run the table. And as a result, over these last 4 decades, we have just a collapsing of our middle class, and now we're on the verge of something like a job loss apocalypse, a robot apocalypse. 55% of people work in these service industries with artificially low wages and artificially high housing costs, and those jobs are going to be automated out of existence. All of those truck drivers, all of those people working at Walmart and McDonald's, all of those service workers, as well as white collar professions. Legal services are being automated in ways with advanced algorithms that change the way that law is practiced in a lot of good ways. But we need to make adjustments. And the Futurist New Deal is a $52,000 basic income for every adult, and that is $1,000 a week every year for the rest of your life, and that is funded through a federal land dividend, and that there are federal lands held in great number. We have 85% of them are not national parks or not in use, and we would lease them to carbon neutral companies that would generate $173 trillion a year. $173 trillion over the course of 10 years, enough to fund a basic income and also fill in the gaps in our public health service. We need a national public health service as well. I'm glad to hear you say that you. I mean, I knew this, but it's always nice to be able to talk to someone on the record who supports humane economic policies. And knowing your politics, I wouldn't have expected any less.
Yeah, I'm really disappointed that there hasn't been, I guess, like intelligent criticism of Yang and what he's proposing. With a lot of progressives and a lot of progressives, in the, I guess, what's the word that they use? Galaxy brain, like the people that go to Burning Man and they're like, they've got their heads up here and they're like trying to go to Mars and stuff. But they're they see that a fundamental step towards that, and what would be instantly great it would be a boon to the economy, is to have something like a universal basic income. One of the criticisms that I've heard, and I'm glad that you touched on that, is that it would you be getting rid of social programs like Social Security and about food stamps and things like that. My opinion is that I think that if people wanted to phase them out, that there should be a period of doing that. But I don't see any reason to get rid of them. It's just create another funding stream. I didn't hear you mention this, but we should go back to the tax laws that we had before Reagan. Reagan is what put the nail in the coffin, and we basically lost half of our revenue from taxes when Reagan got rid of the marginal whatever the marginal tax rate was at the time, and it just that's when you saw we were keeping pace with the ruling class, right? And then the 80s is when it just went like this. Yeah. And they basically it's ridiculous.
And that level
be a billionaire in their lifetime. I mean, how did you get to be a billionaire in your lifetime? I mean, it's ridiculous that anybody should be that rich and have that many resources. Like
Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk would still be doing their work if they paid a higher marginal tax rate. They would still be building their operations in the same way. Nobody needs $100 million a year. I will address a couple of the things that you said. There's a certain sense in which, as a concession to a broad spectrum of political opinions in my organization, the Futurist New Deal, I am kind of running to the right of myself a little bit. So we have an initiative where we have corporate tax returns, metadata from corporate tax returns, and being available to the public under the Freedom of Information Act. And also a broad swath of tax reform initiatives in the Futurist New Deal, including, and this is again a good example of where it's not my feeling, but it is a starting point. We would make the close tax loopholes and outright treachery and villainy, offshoring of funds in the tax system. But in this first iteration, we would have set a corporate tax rate at 20%, which is low. It's about 4%. It's about 2.5% higher than the effective corporate tax rate now, and that number could be a lot higher. But as we mentioned, our UBI is itself funded through a novel revenue stream, and so there's no need for concern trolling about belt tightening and so forth through in that way. So we would, but also we should say that Social Security would not be affected. Effectively, this is a Social Security for all program, but elderly people would continue to receive funds that they receive or funds not in excess of the $52,000. They wouldn't be getting double that. This is a system. This is a program for people from 18 to 63, the middle class basic income. And there's a number of other tax reforms I suppose I could mention. There are things. I see no possibility that the United States will realistically become more right libertarian in its tax policies, right libertarian, and its tax policies in the coming years. But we need to be making those steps of fixing these problems with transparency and accountability, and removing wholesale graft from how our government is run. And that's also a feature of the e-governance part of the platform. I-voting is a good alternative to the problems that derive from paper ballots. There's these words, burning the ballot box and stuffing the ballot box. They refer to paper ballots just as well as they refer to the hacking of voting machines. And that's not hacking by some hacker in Nigeria or Macedonia. That's hacking by Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and basically every GOP, not to single those two guys out particularly, but every GOP running on a voter suppression steady diet of voter suppression tactics. If we create a level of transparency and user involvement and citizen involvement that's built into the system, and also it ultimately is far less expensive. Digitalization and automation is a less expensive form of infrastructure and growth model than these 20th century outmoded bricks and mortar type models. So yeah, a little bit about the futurist New Deal. It is the idea of this is not just that we've done a disservice to the middle class. That is a huge idea, but it's also, and it's not just that this robot apocalypse is going to be bad and we need to do something about it. It's also that all of these people, we mentioned homeless folks, those in a little bit better world, those people would be making apps. Those people would be having good relations with their family. They wouldn't be regarded in this way. They wouldn't be living in this way. And we can do that for people. And in doing so, we add an awful lot of value to our society and our economy. We don't treat people like they're human garbage. We don't let people fall by the wayside. We create a system that allows them to make the kind of contribution that they would naturally make if they had been given half a chance.
So that brings up something that I want to start transitioning towards a closing. Some of the things that I've gotten from the solar punk group that some of the solar punk groups that I'm in on Facebook is that it really is looking at a paradigm shift, and the part of the reason that we were even able to get to this point, specifically as people in the United States geographically, is that there is such a push towards individualism, and there's the quote, and I'm not going to misquote. I'm not going to remember who it is because it's always it's remembered as a misquote, but that it's a country of temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Well, we don't always.
John Steinbeck.
I don't know if it's Steinbeck. I think that people think it's Steinbeck, but it's actually somebody else. But I don't know. Everybody copied off of everybody else, so it doesn't really matter. The point being that we all think that we're going to make it, and very few of us do. And instead of thinking about making it, we should think about the people that don't, and who are furthest from making it, and how much more similar we are to them than to Bezos and Musk and all these.
We don't need to be lionizing those people. That serves little function. So
we also need to stop dehumanizing people just because they don't have money. Your worth is not measured in how much you can earn, and that's something that capitalism has driven into us, is that you are your money, you are your value, your net worth. And the reality is that we need to get away from that and think about everybody as having some value, and what can we do to see the humanity and to empathize with the person that's in front of us, regardless of who they are or what they look like, what they're wearing, whether they're rich or they're poor. And I mean, it's possible, but it's about unlearning a lot of the behaviors that make us narcissistic and isolated capitalists, people that are obsessed with the idea of buying value instead of thinking about how we can demonstrate value by helping other people. And it is a lot to expect from people, and it's the closest thing to any kind of blind faith that I can muster, because I have no reason to believe that humanity can make that kind of shift, but I have to believe it, because uh, otherwise we won't make it. And one of the things that I think that we should be doing is organizing. I think that we should all just be finding the common ground, and I think it's across ideologies. I'm not going to necessarily agree with somebody like Betsy Davos, and I'm not going to agree with whoever 45 spiritual advisor. That person is,
Yeah,
I
she's pretty
mean,
weak.
so well, I mean, I was just going to say, it's like I don't have. I don't have an interest in having a spiritual discussion with them. But my parents, who are both extremely conservative Catholic, used to vote Republican up until 45. I can build common ground with them, because even though I don't necessarily believe in what they believe, they gave me an understanding about their beliefs directly. So I can build on that, and I can share something with them. And even though we don't agree, and it's something that has been very difficult to learn, it's about how to disagree respectfully, and to still work towards something that is mutually beneficial and good. Um, I I'm hoping that for the block of Latinx voters, that they are able to realize that the seemingly uh, inviable, you know, pro-choice, pro-life, that one voting issue is so
The wedge
small
issue.
and it's so infinitesimal compared to the policies that are actually getting Latinx people killed right now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so small, and this is something that has been, and I think that there are a lot of Catholics that are like, you know what, I don't care about this. It's important, and I'm supposed to believe it as a Catholic, but this is what Jesus would actually be saying. This is what you should do, and it's hard, because it's it I think for a lot of people who are voting for 45, it's like, oh, that's the person that looks like me and says the things that I would want to say if I were in that position, and so I'm going to vote for that person, even though it's lies, just lies, 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 just to get people to do what they want to do, and it's effective. They're effective lies, but they're still lies, and the people who are unwilling to see that, we have to vote around them. We can't convince them. We can try, but I mean, my experience is that they're pretty solidly decided that they're going to do the dumb thing. So I think it's about building coalitions, organizing, getting the wave to be as blue and as big as possible. And again, this is voting as harm reduction. I think that most Democrats are centrists, and they're shill centrists. They're corporate shill centrists. They're not even centrists that are like, closer to Obama. No, they're like, I mean, and he was a corporate shill, but like, they're like closer to like Biden and Rourke kind of shill.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think that the Satanic Temple has been doing really interesting things with their political demonstrations. I think that we need to really talk intelligently about the Second Amendment, and what that's going to look like, because our politicians are not going to do anything unless we demand it of them. And that's been the issue, is that yes, it is the politicians, yes, it is the gun lobby, but the NRA is becoming more and more defanged. It's losing power. So now it's really about the fact that we are not demanding our representatives represent what we want them to do. And for me, it's as simple as like, I think that if you can get a gun and protect yourself, you might need to do that, because we might have militias that are going around trying to kill everybody. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. But if I'm the only person that doesn't have a gun, that said, I
Well,
also agree with possibly having stricter laws. So I think it's about deciding what we want and making the politicians act. and possibly looking towards a federal mandate on what should be done for gun control. Um,
We need
and
to.
and I mean we need to make our politicians, our representatives listen about the environment. We just need to. And if I had my solution is that we have 100 companies that are the worst polluters, and
Mm,
each of those companies have administration, and it's a handful of people.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we don't have to
yeah,
do anything violent. We just have to know what their names are and how to
yeah,
contact them and let our voices be heard. That's all we have to do. Because
yeah,
when they get those messages in droves from all over the world, they're going to start thinking about what kind of impact they're having.
yeah.
Because it's harder to be invisible and make bad decisions when you're being held accountable by name.
Mm,
The point that I wanted, we were talking about the white supremacist movement in this country. We don't have to punch Nazis. I mean, I agree with punching Nazis, but when I say punch Nazis, when I say that it's okay to punch Nazis, I'm actually talking about holding them accountable.
mm,
And if they're in a hood, if they're like trying to hide their identity, bringing their identity out to light, because that's doxing. And I'm not an advocate of doxing except in this situation.
mm.
If you're talking about hurting people, and if
Yeah,
you're a white supremacist and you're hiding behind a robe, it's okay for your employer to know that you are a white supremacist and what kind of stuff you're saying online. It's absolutely okay, because they
yeah,
need to know that you're representing their company. If you
yeah,
have that, you have that on your Facebook that you work for this company, they're representing your company. So it's oh, by the way, I saw that this is one of your employees. Does this represent XYZ Corp? So
mm,
I think it's totally okay to do that. I don't think it's the same as, I mean, they're putting that information out there. And if
mm,
you happen to know who somebody is, and they're going around and they're basically the organizers, I don't feel like these racists should feel as comfortable as they are walking around doing what they're doing. And the only way they're going to stop is by us calling them out and saying, you're a bully and you're trash, and I know where you work. Keep talking. I'll
mm,
get it all on camera.
mm,
So,
mm.
I mean, that's the most non-violent way I can think of dealing with things. When it comes right down to it, if a Nazi is trying to hurt somebody or hurt me, I'm going to punch the Nazi. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it's self-defense. It's not aggression, and it's what
right.
makes it's what makes me different from a terrorist, is that I'm not trying to go out there and scare people, but white
Right.
supremacists.
Yeah, yeah, and that's that's the thing of people are as using Antifa as a scare word is shortened form of anti-fascist. So
Yeah,
like how much fascist apologism do we need to be doing? These people with ethno-nationalist and all manner of I mean, as a fascist, as we mentioned earlier, in this in a certain sense, it's not just somebody who is telling you what to do or being mean to you or something. It's somebody who has a very specific worldview about the merger of corporatist power and military power and government might. And that is a worldview that has done tremendous damage to quality of life the world around and in this country, particularly in recent decades. And that is something that we have to fight. And fighting that is also it's also about like what you said, not just doxing these street fighting jerks, but doxing these climate crisis bad actors in the form of this thing that you mentioned. I'm going to share this article because there's an article that shows a map of the world and the worst climate crisis bad actors from organizations, their names, and it's
sure.
an article because that's the kind of conversation we need to be having. These people shouldn't just be acting with impunity because of this anonymity and because this none of those companies, none of those 100 companies, if they had basic standards and practices for caring for environmental practices, if they weren't just defraying costs by dumping stuff, if they actually had to take care of that, none of them would be profitable. Coke Industries, all of those companies, they would not be profitable. But they're defraying those costs. They're just dumping that out on us and creating great human misery as a result. And not only that, but now we've catalyzed a climate crisis, which we don't know how we're going to address that. Transhumanists often talk about bioremediation and similar efforts, and near Earth industrialization and off-world efforts in the hopes of surviving this. But we don't know. We don't know what we're going to do, and that's because of these 100 guys, and that's
Yeah.
and that and it's also because of these corporatist Christ of fascists, not just these boot wearing thugs.
We have we have a backsliding. We have a relapse into the deregulation or the lack of regulation that we had in Chicago in the 80s, and it's already starting to have an impact. There was a company that is just south east of Chicago, closer to Indiana, in Indiana, that dumped a bunch of cyanide into Lake
Yeah,
Michigan.
yeah, yeah,
And they did it again.
yeah.
And they apologized for the first time, but they did it again
But then they
because they
did it
knew they
again.
could get away with it.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that people who are like, oh yeah, deregulation is a great thing. It's like for who? For
yeah.
the people that are making money, but
Right,
not
right.
for us. Not for the
Yeah,
people that live right there on the lake.
yeah,
And I used to, when I was staying in with a friend in Northwest Indiana, I used to live right by the dumping the area that is affected by, and it's going to have an impact there for. I mean, it's gonna mess with the flora and fauna, and people can't go into the water. There's like a it's toxic now, you know. I'm gonna have to wrap this up, but it was a pleasure
yeah.
talking to you.
Let's let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely, yeah,
Let's coordinate our
yeah. Pick a
campaigns a little.
topic and let's try and like flesh out like a
Yeah,
really solid kind of what would we do as as somebody that's like trying to use technology and trying to use like I feel like solar punk is a little bit more about like community organized grassroots organizing community like development in order to solve these problems so that we can actually transition away from this very toxic and very myopic uh, worldview that is it's very like an industrial like use resources industrialist capitalist. Let's try and move away from that. So let's pick a topic and try and flesh it out.
yeah.
It was a great pleasure talking to you.